discussing the issues and celebrating the successes of the African American community. This is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm your host, Barbara Ham Lee. This is a recent edition of the New Journal Guide, the newspaper that has chronicled the comings and goings of the Hampton Roads African American community for 108 years. So when was the last time you read the New Journal Guide? Sadly, many of you are unaware that the paper even exists, and the Guide is not alone. Many black newspapers across America are in trouble. Circulation and advertising revenue are down, but there are also those who question the relevance of the black press in today's world. Joining us to talk about the black press in America is Brenda Andrews, publisher of the New Journal Guide, Dr. Wanda Brockington, chair of Norfolk State University's Department of Mass Communications and Journalism, and Dr. Cathy Jackson, assistant professor also with NSU's School of Mass Communications and Journalism. Welcome to the program, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me today. Brenda, since you're in it on a day-to-day basis, in your opinion, what is the state of the black press today?
I think the black press is in a good state. And I have to say that because we've been in the economy situation for such a long time that people talk about this economy. This economy is no different than any other economy that the black press has been in. So we not only are staying afloat, we are using our resources in a way that allows us to get more buck for our bang, or bang for our buck, or whatever that saying is. And granted, there are some black newspapers that are having trouble, and that's not to be taken lightly. But there are some black newspapers that are doing extremely well, and then there are some, like the Journal and Guide, that are just trudging and moving right along because we've been doing it for 109 years, and we're going to keep on.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the history of the Journal and Guide, because this paper was one of the premier papers in the South. And I mean, at one point, in its major heyday, everybody was reading it all across the South. Wasn't that correct?
Absolutely. This paper has such a tremendous history, and that's what's driven me at the Journal and Guide for 28 years, because the history, particularly during the World War II period, is something that was not being recorded in places other than in black newspapers as regards to the African American community. We had war correspondents in Europe. We had reporters throughout the United States. Our circulation at that time topped 100,000. And at one point, we were the single largest employer of black labor in the South. So we have a tremendous history, and it's exciting to me to have been a part of the past 28 years and moving it from that presence into the 21st century.
What are you doing differently today than in terms of growing the paper?
Well, we are looking more and more at technology like other media are doing. We have on August the 6th the launch of our new website. We've been on the web for a number of years, but on August the 6th, Barbara, you will see a state-of-the-art website at njournalg.com.
Wow,
and
we heard it here, right here on the
heard it here first. I am so
Congratulations.
excited. I had a young man who did that as part of a project at Norfolk State, and he is now in a business for himself, and he wanted to do that for us. And so he worked with us, he worked with me, and I'm excited. I can hardly wait to, we're going to have YouTube and flashing advertising and all that stuff that young people know about. All I know is it looks good.
And do you think that this is a way that you will be able to continue to serve the African American community?
I do. And actually, we can, through this new technology, we can become a daily, because we have enough news to update our newspaper on a daily basis. We just don't have the print material to do that, or the money. Of course, online, it's a different economics, and so that's the way a lot of media is moving currently. We don't want to become a totally online newspaper because many of our readers are not computer savvy, and our commitment is to the entire African American community, and our strength comes from the entire African American community. So we want to maintain a print edition and look to having a daily online edition.
That is fantastic. Cathy, talk to us about the history. How did the Black Press get started?
The Black Press, like many newspapers, many newspapers for the ethnic populations, American Indians, they all started because of a crisis. On March 16, 1827, the first African American newspaper was launched, Freedom's Journal. And they had it as their motto, "Too long have others spoken for us. We wish to plead our own cause." And at that time, they were fighting for abolition. They were fighting against injustices that were launched at the black community. And it was founded in New York City, and that was because they had a large population of free men, and they also had a large the population was more literate than in other places. And even though they had these gains, they were still, there was still a lot of prejudice. For example, New York passed a law at this time that said that African Americans had to be 21 years of age, they had to own at least $250 worth of property before they could vote. And that was not the same criteria that was aimed at white people or white men at that time. And so they had to face all of these kinds of things. Their places of worship, they were, you know, relegated to the balconies or to a section that was called colored people. And so that's where they had to sit. And then finally, the AME Church was launched because they walked out of the Episcopal Church and started their own because they got tired of sitting in those places.
So black newspapers were an outgrowth also of a need to be able to express themselves, to be able to protest, to be able to try to right some wrongs.
But it was also there as they wanted a record of African Americans or blacks at that time. They wanted to record their marriages, their births, their deaths, and those were not recorded in the majority newspapers. All they recorded was when someone committed a crime, or they said that we needed Mordecai Noah. He owned one of the newspapers at that time, the New York, was it the New York Age and the New York Express, one of those. And he advocated that all blacks should be returned to Africa, the colonization.
Yes, colonization of Africa. Yes. And a lot of the black newspapers, and Brenda, you can address this also, and you too, Wanda, for that matter, but took an advocacy role as opposed to what you would say, or it was more advocacy journalism than opposed to straight journalism.
And it's still advocacy journalism. We advocate on behalf of the African American community. That is our primary purpose. We don't intend to be objective in the sense that we would not be an advocate for the rights of the black community. That's our mission. That's our purpose. And as Cathy said, the first founders said, for too long, others have spoken for us. Now it's time we speak for ourselves. And, you know, that was 1827. This is 2009, 180 some years later. And that is still our driving force.
Cathy, talk to me about the Chicago Defender. That paper went all over the South, all over the North, the Midwest.
When the Chicago Defender was founded by Robert S. Abbott, he knew that he wanted to have a different kind of newspaper. He saw an opportunity there, and in the process, he also launched his own fortunes. He was the first black man to become a millionaire as a publisher. And as you said, at one time, his newspaper had a circulation, or it was read by 100,000. And he also, well, you didn't know also about the pass-along circulation. In the South, where many people could not afford the paper or even read it, they would pass it along until it was just in shreds. But if someone,
so that everybody could know what was
could
going
see
on.
it. And because it was so pivotal in the northern migration, at one time the South, many southern states banned it from coming into their cities. And that's why he used the railroad porters to throw the paper off at a designated point and the African Americans would go and pick it up and still pass it around in the community. But if they were caught reading it, they would send them to jail.
Ida Wells, who was a female publisher, was run out of the South, wasn't she?
Right.
Was burned.
The
Wanda?
Memphis Free Press.
You want to talk about Ida Wells and what happened with her?
Well, she was very outspoken about lynching, and of course those were very unpopular views, especially from a woman of color, and they just kind of ran her away.
And I guess the Southern papers kind of had a problem being as vocal, I guess, in some ways, compared to the Northern black papers, because of where they were located. I mean, Ida Wells' place was bombed.
That's a very good point. And what makes the Journal and Guide so exceptional is that it was the only newspaper south of the Mason-Dixon line that did grow into that stature of the Chicago Defender or the Baltimore Afro-American or the New York Amsterdam News. And as you said, it was very difficult back then and still today to address racial issues in an environment that is very racist. And so that's what set the Norfolk's Journal and Guide apart from some of the other Southern newspapers.
Because you were able to, P.B. Young and others were able to kind of walk that fine line.
It had to be, you had to walk the fine line. P.B. Young could not do
He was
in
the publisher.
Norfolk. He was the publisher and owner. He could not do in Norfolk and Virginia in the South the same things that could be done in Chicago. But in his own way, he was able to accomplish much of the same mission in a different kind of way. And he did address a lot of issues. He addressed the issue of housing in Norfolk, for example, was one of the first publishers to talk about slums, and Norfolk was one of the first cities in the nation to get public housing as a result of the editorials that were done in the Journal and Guide.
Now, but the advertising was also an issue because white advertisers didn't want to spend money on papers that advocated for what they would call militancy.
So many newspapers, the black newspapers, had to resort to having ads about lightening creams, and even now, sometimes when my students compile newspapers from around the country or from their hometowns, you will see advertising about the grocery stores selling chicken feet. I've never understood what you can do with a chicken foot, but you know, or chitlins, or you know, things like that. Well, you will always see those in the black newspaper because the same old stereotypes are there.
I would like to add that the black papers gave a unique perspective on lynching. When you compare articles about lynching from the majority paper and the black paper, they are totally different. There was a gleefulness and a miserable feeling with the majority papers, but in the black press, you got the real story. You got the sadness and the grief and the tragedy. So it's necessary to present both sides of that issue.
Now, at one time, the black press was also the only place where black journalists could work. And civil rights, I'm kind of moving us forward a little bit kind of quickly here, but civil rights was almost a backfiring thing in terms of the black press. Would you agree with that?
Right. After civil rights, many of the black reporters, they were, well, even during civil rights, because Brenda and I were talking about the black man who was the first black at the LA Times. And he worked at the newspaper, but it was in some menial position. And they said, well, come on, we'll get him. That was at the time that you had to watch Riot, because they were afraid to go into the community.
That's the way a lot of black broadcast journalists got started also, because they needed someone who was able to go into these neighborhoods. But didn't that also wind up then being a brain drain in terms of talent that were willing to go into the
civil rights
after the civil rights?
Right.
Well, I think so, but no more than any other of our institutions. We saw the brain drain in colleges. We saw the brain drain in businesses. We saw the brain drain certainly in the black press. All of our institutions suffered as a result of losing some of the talent that could now go to another resource. But I think we're seeing some reversal now, because it's becoming more popular to go to a black college, historically black college. It's becoming more of a mission to, and I have several requests from young people who want to be a part of the black press.
And that's where I was coming to you, Wanda, because that's your area of expertise. But what are the students today saying about the black press, and how do they feel about working for the black press?
Well, I think they're very interested in it, although I'm happy that Brenda said what she said about converting to the electronic format, because we found that our journalism majors and our broadcast majors have to have the exact same skill sets now. So I think, given that everything is going to be electronic and fast-paced and so forth, there is some interest in that. But I have to tell you, trend-wise, journalism students now are opting more for public relations. We tend to not get as many news writers and people who are interested in news. And I think
Really?
by and
Why
large,
is that? Why do you think that is?
well, if you talk to students now, many of them don't read news.
Don't read.
They don't read.
Don't read anything.
They get their news in a capsulated form through the internet, through their cell phone, and the idea of taking a newspaper and opening it up and reading it, they don't do it. They'll tell you, I don't read newspapers. Not to say they don't get news and information, but they get it in a different format than we're used to.
So the black press is suffering from the same thing that all
Absolutely.
newspapers are, from that perspective, in terms of
we're
people actually reading.
Yeah, we're getting to a point where you're going to see major cities without a daily publication.
We already there.
Journalism is really suffering.
But I think that has to be attributed to the newspaper industry. You have to recreate your readership, and the newspaper industry has not done that. If you don't give people something interesting to read and get them at an age where they want to read, it's not just newspapers, it's reading, where they want to read, then they grow up without that desire or love for it. And so the newspaper industry itself has reneged on its responsibility in many cases to the community. It no longer is the advocate for the community. It gives stuff, and I say stuff as news to the community that they don't want to read, because it's easier to do. Journalists are not being trained to go after stories.
Enterprise stories.
Most newspapers are combining their units. They're cutting out editions.
JOAs.
I might want to add too that we live in an age of citizen journalism. So the average person who has a cell phone or can blog or Twitter is not only just participating in the news, but actually creating it sometimes.
Well, let me ask you this too, Wanda. What are you teaching the journalism students, the both of you? Because it frightens me in the sense, because it's almost like saying we don't have to be professionally trained any longer to be journalists. And when you talk about citizen journalism, some of that stuff has to be taken with a grain of salt in terms of truthfulness and balance and
it's
so forth.
Morley Safer said citizen journalism is a lot like citizen surgery. You want somebody who's trained. You need people who can be objective, who can study the issue from both sides, who can present it fairly and balanced. And we're not often getting that. But it's very hard, for those of us in the classroom, it's very hard for us to compete with the Twitter and the Facebook and the MySpace and that kind of thing. But clearly we want to train our journalists in the traditional way of gathering news and checking it for accuracy and so forth.
Do you think, Cathy, that more newspapers are going to do as Brenda's doing and going online? Or
Well,
are
of
they
course,
already doing this?
We see that now, the Christian Science Monitor, 100-year-old.
But I'm talking about black newspapers.
Well, I think black newspapers are going that way, that there are some who have excellent websites, and others are just, pretty at the basic level that they see they have to do something. But I don't think they have the, what would you say? They don't have the workers or the personnel that will drive them in that direction, because they don't have the budget to hire anyone else. And that is one of the reasons why majority newspapers are also failing, because they held too long to that old model. They thought they had a monopoly in the neighborhood, in the community or the cities in which they were established. And by the time they looked up and it was like, uh-oh, we're losing readers. What can we do? And they rushed out and they had started all these news, these pages for women, pages for teenagers, mall pages. Some of them even had mall reporters.
Wow, good gracious. You start to wonder. Brenda, we just have a couple minutes left. What would PB Young say today if he came back and looked at the New Journal and Guide?
I think PB would be pleased to know that in 2009 that we have not given up the commitment to the community, and that we are making changes that need to be made to keep the paper moving forward. I think he'd be pleased.
Fantastic. And with that, ladies, we've got to end this discussion. I know it goes by really quickly, but I so appreciate you joining me on the show today. And our thanks to Brenda Andrews, Dr. Wanda Brockington, and Cathy Jackson, Dr. Cathy Jackson, for their insight and expertise on the Black press, both locally and nationally. And when we come back, a tribute to another first within our community. But right now, a look at what's happening in Hampton Roads. Welcome back, everybody. Judge Joseph Jordan was a man of many firsts. He was the first African American to be elected to Norfolk City Council, the first to hold office of vice mayor, and Norfolk's first black general court judge. In spite of all that he accomplished, Judge Jordan spent his spare time making sure other African Americans were remembered for the contributions they made to society. But now it's the judge's turn. Lisa Godley shows us how Judge Jordan's family is memorializing the man, his character, and his accomplishments in a very special way.
What started out as a way to pay tribute to an amazing man has blossomed into an eye-catching attraction in Norfolk's Park Place community. Just drive down West 35th Street and you can't help but notice the beautiful paintings of old photographs, each one paying tribute to retired General District Judge Joseph Jordan.
The photograph that you have here, this is Joseph Jordan and Patricia Gardner. This is when he was being sworn in 1968 as city councilman, first African American since Reconstruction.
The judge's nephew, Rodney Jordan, wanted to do something to highlight his uncle's contribution to the community and decided on a mural. But who would paint it?
One day I was at a local restaurant and this gentleman was up on a beam doing a mural, and I asked him for his card and tracked him down, and we got together and brainstormed on this project, and I had no idea that he would be able to produce something as authentic and excellent as these images are.
All but one of the paintings are copies of original photographs, beautifully recreated by artist John Hickey.
Yeah, this one here is more of an illustration than a traditional photograph type look. This one here is actually two parts. Everyone was at the meeting, but they weren't at the table together, so we're kind of bringing all of his associates together in it's more of a piece of artwork, or a new photo that never really existed, but they were there in theme.
Each painting depicts important values the judge held, things like community development, togetherness, neighborhood ties, and of course, family.
So you have my father is to my far right, and you have the 9 brothers and sisters. You have my grandmother, Agnes Jordan, and then my grandfather, Joseph Jordan Sr., is up in the photograph, in the framed image.
Rodney Jordan describes his uncle as a patriotic man who believed strongly in the Constitution.
He wrote a book, We Can Make It Together. In the back of the book, he included the U.S. Constitution. He fought in World War II, was injured at age 21, paralyzed from the waist down, but did not allow that to stop him.
Family spokesperson Cheryl Wilkerson describes the judge as a straight shooter who went by the book.
He was fair, he was strict, he was across the board. If you went somewhere and you were shoplifting and on the laws, the books, it said that you were to get 30 days for stealing $1 worth of merchandise, You got 30 days, no matter what you were. He won before the Supreme Court back in 1964. He and Thurgood Marshall argued the poll tax. Miss Evelyn Butts had brought it before the Supreme Court, and they won.
In addition to being the first black appointed to Norfolk City Council, he was also the first African American to hold the title of vice mayor in the city, a position he held from 1972 until 1977 when he was appointed judge. His family says Judge Jordan was a strong believer in highlighting contributions African Americans made to the growth and development of this country. So it is only fitting that a man who worked so diligently to bring equity and justice to the people of Norfolk be remembered in such a wonderful way. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And that's the thing I love about Another View, because you're always learning something. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Another View. Please visit our website, www.anotherview.tv, to see some past shows, send us your comments, or subscribe to our eView newsletter, a weekly reminder of upcoming show topics. We're always available via regular mail, 5200 Hampton Boulevard, Norfolk, 23508. Next week, we'll celebrate the successes and talk about the challenges of being a first-generation college graduate. We'll see you next time for Another View.